If ever you have carpentry work that needs done, or cement work, concrete block laying work that needs done, I have some advice for you. Don't call me. I could name 100 different things that would make that statement absolutely true, but I will share with you two events in my life that I did, and I'm not proud to say I did. We had a friend in our home church who lived in a small cottage. It was her homestead, and Cindy had health issues and was not able to provide money in order to take care of her cottage. And over a long period of time, the foundation, the old rock foundation, literally disintegrated and fell apart. And one corner of her house was hanging in midair. There was nothing supporting it. And so the young people's group of that church decided we would help Cindy. And we did. We dug all the dirt out. We poured the footer. We reinforced the footer. We bought cement blocks and cement to build this wall. We jacked the house back up into place where it was more level. And over a course of time, we began to build this wall. Well, over that same period of time, a lot of the volunteers had to go back to their real jobs. And so the work crew diminished and diminished and diminished till it was just me. Honest to goodness, it started well. You know, the string that you put on each corner of your wall, and then you run the blocks according to that string, and the string is usually straight, and it was straight in this case. But layer after layer of blocks went into place. And I was so excited. You know, looking at the inside of the wall, it looked great. And at the completion of it, I walked outside and looked down the length of the wall. Have you ever seen pictures of the Hoover Dam? How it has that big bow in it? Yeah, that's what this wall looked like. It was horrible. And in fact, whenever I went into ministry, Cindy made sure that she gave me an award. As I went into ministry, it was the Crooked Square Award or something. I think I still have it somewhere in our filing cabinet at home. And it was the running joke of that young adults group and Cindy, rest in peace now. She's gone on to a home that's much more perfect in every way. She's with her Lord now, but I think of that and I think, you know, it started well, but I began to believe that what I was doing was more important and more correct than what the string was telling me to do. The other account was back in the day when we added an addition to our home, and I did the work, and we had the roof rafters up there, the 16-inch center roof rafters, and they were all in place. And I knew that I needed to put bracing between these rafters. And so rather than go up and measure and come down and cut and go up and measure and come down and cut, I just decided to do all the braces cuts on the ground. And I measured the first one out. It was 15 3/8 or something like that. And I cut it. And then instead of using the tape measure to measure 15 3/8 again, I used the first board I cut. I stuck it on there and measured it, cut it. Then instead of using the tape measure or the first board I cut, I used the second board I cut. And so after about 6 or 7 cuts, I grabbed all these boards and realized that it looked like steps. Do you realize that a circular saw, that the blade takes about almost 1/8 of an inch off of every board? Yeah, I didn't know that. Or if I did, I didn't think about it. So I took all these boards up thinking, oh, they'll fit. Well, they did, but I had to pry the roof rafters over and nail them in so that it would, but whenever you looked at the roof rafters, they went, eh. So if you need carpentry work done or cement block laying, do yourself a favor. Hire a professional. Someone who knows what they're doing, who uses standard practices and gets the job done and gets the job done well. Well, I share those two humorous stories, which they weren't humorous at the time, they're humorous now, to talk to you about Paul's writings here, both in Galatians and Romans. Paul was a little bit passionate about his preaching of the gospel. He was that disciple turned apostle on the road to Damascus. He was actually persecuting the church. He was going around gathering these new believers in Jesus and putting them in jail. He had letters to go into all these different areas and arrest people. And Jesus met him on the road to Damascus and said, well, at the time, Saul, Saul, what are you doing? And at that point, Paul was struck blind, dependent on somebody to lead him where he couldn't see to go on his own. And he heard and experienced the righteousness, the holiness of God in that moment. And so for 3 days, he struggled in this blind place, couldn't see anything. And finally, he came to faith in Christ in that moment when he understood that what he was doing was going against what God was calling him to. And so from that point forward, he began to preach this gospel of righteousness, this gospel of holiness, this gospel of transformation that occurs when a person confesses their sin, repents of it, and turns and faces the cross and says, yes, what happened on that implement of destruction, that implement of pain and suffering, is what I need. And so this was the message that Paul went city by city by city and preached. In fact, the town of Galatia was one of those places. And here he is writing this letter to the church, and he's a little bit upset. I'm astonished that you are so quickly deserting the one who called you by the grace of Christ, and you're turning to a different gospel. It's sort of akin to measuring that first board. Oh, that's 15 3/8. And then instead of using the proper standard messenger or the message, you begin to change it ever so slightly. And when you get to the 6th or 7th cut, you're no longer 15 3/8, you're like 14 1/4 or something like that. And so here was this church. They had heard the gospel of Jesus Christ, the death, the resurrection, and the ascension of the Lord, and the power of the blood on the cross. And they heard it, they accepted it, they received it. It was great. But then they started hearing these little voices out on the sides, voices that were not kosher. They weren't in line with this gospel that Paul had preached. And Paul caught wind of it. You know, to demonstrate exactly how excited and upset he was, when he said to the church, why are you deserting the one message? Translated, that word deserting, if you could just picture a soldier in battle, setting their gun down and running away, that's the image of what the church was doing with this treasured message of Jesus Christ's death, resurrection. And so he goes on a little bit further, and he's challenging these false teachers, these voices that are on the periphery talking into this church. And Paul says to the church, whoever it was, and what Kristen read, Paul said, whoever it was, they should be cursed. In the NIV, it says they should be eternally condemned. That's pretty harsh. Paul pulls no punches. Whoever's doing this, they need to stop. It's like it would have been really good that day in the basement when someone saw me lay the block on the next course of cement blocks, if someone would have tapped me on the shoulder and said, you think you might want to check that? You want to check it against the string that you laid out there to make sure that it's plumb? It would have been nice. Or if my wife would have come out and said, hey, what are you doing? When I was cutting those braces. Now, I might not have appreciated her question. Oh, honey, I'm just cutting some braces here. But it might have been good if that extra set of eyes was watching me do what I was doing and pose the question, so how's that going to work after the 6th or 7th cut? Is that still going to be 15 3/8? Paul says whoever's doing that, they need to stop. And he says it in such terse terms, eternally condemned. And if you don't think that was bad enough, he comes back the second time and says, as we have already said, I say it again, if anyone is preaching to you a gospel other than what you accepted from us, let him be eternally condemned. That's twice. That's emphasis. That is Paul upset. That is the church beginning to divert from the original message. And the more you divert, at first it doesn't seem like much, but when you get out there a couple miles and look back, you're no longer this far from the gospel, you're exponentially this far from the gospel, the original message. Paul goes on then in Romans chapter 1 that Kristen shared with us, and he talks about the gospel. I'm not ashamed of the gospel because it is the power of God for salvation. And then he says this, for in the gospel is a righteousness from God. It's revealed from God. A righteousness that is by faith from first to last, just as it is written, the righteous will live by faith. You might have heard, or maybe you see it being played out around you in other states around the world, but sometimes you will hear people promoting a gospel that sounds really close to the scriptures and the gospel, but there's something different about it. Something that doesn't track quite what you remember learning about in your Sunday school class or in your Bible study, and you begin to think, what is that? I share a story with you. I would like to tell you that this story isn't true, but it is. This account is shared with us by Kathy Lynn Grossman in a book entitled Rite of Baptism Trickles Away. Grossman writes, there are now baptism-style ceremonies in which God is never mentioned. These ceremonies are offered to parents seeking to initiate their children into a world of all faiths, says Emma Drolyard of San Francisco. Emma runs the website ceremonyway.com. Drolyard conducted such an event for a couple in California in 1998 for their baby. We just wanted a larger spirit to guide our daughter, but we didn't want to get specific. We wanted to cover all the bases on her, the mom said. This particular couple grew up Presbyterian, but now mom says, we do Christianity light, L-I-T-E, for our baby. And who now understands that this baby believes in angels, fairies, leprechauns, and Santa Claus. That was dated 2006, that account. So in a sense, what you can see happening is stepping away from the message of the gospel to begin to swirl in human thoughts about how we are transformed, how we are regenerated from death to life, from old to new. We begin to throw into this salad bowl things that we like to hear about, things that we think are legitimate, things that we think will get us into heaven. And the fact of the matter is, the price has already been paid for our ticket to heaven through the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ, who brings this righteousness to us. We're not righteous on our own. We can't get there on our own merit, on our own looks, on how much money we place in the offering tin. It's the righteousness of Christ that allows it all to occur. And so Paul saw what was going on in these churches, addressed it right face to face. I am not ashamed of the gospel because it is the power of God to transform and to bring righteousness and holiness into my dark heart. That's not verbatim, obviously. Paul then goes on to talk about all the things that are going on in the world, the wrath of God against mankind. And just so you know, the wrath of God against mankind has been snipped in the bud by Jesus Christ. What was designed to be placed on our shoulders, the wrath of God, was placed on the shoulders of Jesus Christ. In fact, his whole body. So, in this moment of resurrection living that we're talking about, and we're encouraging you not to turn away from God, I just leave you with these 4 points. Base your faith on the scriptures of the Lord. It's the best place to start. The Old and New Testaments are sufficient for creating faith in Jesus Christ, in God. Consider the traditions of the church, not just First Church, but the church universal. What has been tried and true for thousands of years, look at that. Reason through the scriptures. I have told you once, I'll probably tell you a million times before I leave here, do not disengage your brain when you walk through the doors of this church. Please, please wrestle with the Word. Wrestle with the scriptures. Reason through these things. Reason through the traditions of the church. Well, why do we do that in the worship ceremony? Why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? And finally, look at the experience of all that you're experiencing in the life of the church. The scriptures tied in with the traditions of the church, tied in with the ability that we have to reason, tied in with the overall experience of your faith journey. Does it all fit together? Does it feel like you're straying away from the cross instead of staying in focus of the cross? Those are important places to form your faith, to grow your faith, and then most importantly, to share your faith. And please, don't let Paul have to write you or me a letter and say, "Whoa, what are you doing?" Imagine if I said something and Paul looked at me and raised an eyebrow and said, "Where did you get that from? That's not what you first heard me say to you. What are you doing?" Paul would be excited, animated, and probably just as upset, and certainly, I don't want to be eternally condemned, ever. So as you live out your faith, as you practice your faith, stay true to the Word, to the Lord, to Paul's teachings. Randy Fluke's not here to hear this, but Randy would champion the teachings of Paul right and left and center and back and all the way around. As we stop the message, and as we continue to think on and on about the events of 15 years ago, and yes, some of you have asked me, literally, some of you have walked up and said, "I want to see what's underneath that robe. Do you have your pit shirt on today?" And no, I don't. Because in my mind, and I actually had my pit tie laid out. I had the gold shirt, the blue pants, and I thought, you know what? 15 years ago, something happened, tragically happened to our country, which made everything else unimportant, including a game yesterday between two football teams. And so, as we enter into our time of giving of offering, of our tithes, and we remember many, many people who died, whose lives were changed forever, and that day, football became, it wasn't even important. Nothing was important other than being close to your family, finding out if they were okay, and trying to figure out what was going to happen next. He is going to punch me in the head when I do this, but oh well. We have someone in this church who bravely went and worked in New York City, day after day after day, working on that pile of rubble, giving his time and unfortunately giving his health over to whatever was burning in that stack. And if you get a chance sometime today or sometime this week, shake the hand of Randy Snyder and tell him thank you. Tell him thank you. And I know he's back there shaking his head and I'm probably in big, big trouble, but I still think I can outrun him. You think I can outrun you? He throws heavy things, so I'm probably done. As the ushers come forward, and Randy is one of our ushers, Think about the days gone by since 2001, and think about how God has blessed you in order to bless somebody else.